Hello, in this video I'll discuss how your body interacts with CO2 and how to manipulate your CO2 levels to improve your athletic performance. What causes someone to wear out? You've probably seen athletes at the end of the race. They've been running for a quarter mile, a mile, even longer, and they're out of breath, they're leaning over, they have their hands on their knees, they're wheezing for breath. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. One of them is the harder you run, the more oxygen your muscles need. But here's what's going on. So oxygen is transported through your blood by a protein called hemoglobin, and each hemoglobin molecule can carry up to 4 oxygen molecules. And then when your blood circulates to the cells, it delivers the oxygen. At least it should, but it doesn't always. In 1904, there was a Danish physiologist named Christian Bohr, and he discovered what has come to be known as the Bohr Effect, and that is that the more acidic your blood is, the more readily it delivers oxygen to your cells, and the more alkaline your blood is, the harder time it has delivering oxygen to the cells. In fact, if your blood is too alkaline, you can really be limited on how much oxygen gets delivered, even if your blood is fully saturated with oxygen. I'll come back to that in just a second. But first, what is it that makes your blood acidic or alkaline? Well, it's carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is acidic, and so the more CO2 you have in your blood, the more acidic it is. And the less CO2 you have in your blood, the more alkaline it is. So, as your blood CO2 levels rise, your blood becomes more acidic, and the hemoglobin delivers oxygen more easily. But if you overbreathe and hyperventilate, you purge CO2 from your system. You get rid of the CO2, and so as a result of hyperventilating, your CO2 levels drop, your blood becomes more alkaline, and your blood has a hard time getting oxygen to the cells. So what do they do in a movie if somebody is hyperventilating? They hand them a paper bag and they have them breathe into the paper bag. Why? Well, the popular wisdom is that they had too much oxygen and that's why they were getting lightheaded, but that's not really what's going on, because your blood is always pretty well saturated. Like right now you're probably 96 to 100% saturated, so it's not incremental saturation that makes you get lightheaded. What happens is they hyperventilate, they blow out their CO2. They're blowing out CO2 faster than they're generating it, and so they end up with low CO2 levels and thus alkaline blood. And as a result of that, the oxygen that they do have isn't able to make it to their cells, and they get lightheaded and dizzy and all of that. Another example, so when mountain climbers are struggling with altitude, they'll give them Diamox. Diamox is a prescription medicine that you can get if you're going to be at high elevation and you anticipate having trouble breathing. By the way, I'm not a doctor. This is just what I was able to find on the internet, and do your own research and from your own sources and talk to your own doctor. But anyway, Diamox is often prescribed for people who are going to be at high elevation. And what do you suppose that Diamox does? It makes your blood more acidic. Because it makes your blood more acidic, you have a lot easier time delivering oxygen. And that goes to reiterate the point that when you're struggling at high elevation, a lot of times it's not because you have a lack of oxygen. Diamox doesn't give you more oxygen. What's happening is you start wheezing and breathing too hard, and as a result, your blood becomes alkaline, and Diamox fixes that. And it's able to deliver the oxygen that you're already getting, because there's plenty of it. Not always. If you get to high elevations, you may run into trouble, but first line of defense is usually, or is often, Diamox. So what? What do we do about this? Well, so your body has what I like to refer to as a CO2 thermostat. Maybe that's the wrong analogy, but think of it as a CO2 thermostat. If CO2 levels get too high, it tries to regulate them downward. You know when you hold your breath, that feeling that I have to take a breath, that feeling is caused by CO2 buildup. It's not a lack of oxygen. So your body tries to maintain a certain CO2 level. It doesn't maintain oxygen level. If they put you in a room and there's no oxygen in the room, you probably will be none the wiser until you black out. You let CO2 build up and you notice. Your body senses that. Well, your CO2 thermostatic set point, if we can call it that, is adjustable. You can train yourself to be comfortable with higher CO2 levels. And if you do that, you'll find that you have a much easier time at high elevations or in endurance type events, the ones that normally leave you breathing hard and gasping for air. You won't have to breathe as hard. You won't have to breathe as much. It's just easier because you get into this downward spiral where you start running, and out of habit largely you breathe really hard. I mean, we're told in take a deep breath, breathe lots, make sure you're getting lots of oxygen. Well, the oxygen will take care of itself. You need to make sure you have enough CO2, and you do that by breathing less. You want to set your CO2 thermostat higher. Once your CO2 is set higher, you won't have to start breathing harder until much later. I'll include a few links on for some videos that will be coming out shortly on how to set your CO2 set point higher. Spoiler alert, it involves holding your breath, but there's more to it than that. So I started doing this breathing training a year or two ago, and every summer there's a mountain behind the house that I climb up a few times. It's from base to summit, it's about 6,000 feet. You start at 5,000 feet, you top out at about 11. And previously when I would do this, by the time I got to the top, I would be wheezing and struggling for air. Now when I do it, it's not a struggle. I mean, my heart's still pounding, and you know, my legs are still working hard, and I'm not struggling for air like I used to. It's just a much easier time. And there's a breathing consultant, and by the way, I'll do a video about him and his book soon, but there's a breathing consultant. And seriously, that's kind of my guidance counselor didn't tell me about that job. He works with a couple of groups of people. He works with people with exercise-induced asthma, also people who are athletes who are trying to improve their performance, to squeeze out 1 or 2 more % of their performance. And he says that's typically about what they get, about a 2% improvement in performance. And that may not sound like a lot, but if you run a 50-second 400 meter, it's the difference between 50 and 49. That's the difference between regional and state, perhaps, second to first place. In a mile, you could be talking about 5 or 6 seconds off of your time. And so a 2% improvement can be pretty substantial. But CO2, counterintuitively, CO2 is the secret. And the higher level of CO2 you can tolerate, and the easier it will be for you to breathe. Now, the 2%, that's for Olympic athletes. For mere mortals like myself, you might see a much more marked improvement. So stay tuned. You don't want to not see the rest of the story. You want to click the subscribe button, because then you'll be notified when new videos come out. More to follow. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.